As we're just a couple weeks away from training camp being kicked off, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about some players that are on the roster bubble. Some guys that might make the roster or some players that could be cut. You're watching Giants Now by Chat Sports. I'm your host, Marshall Green. If you could, please hit that thumbs up icon and let's dive into it. The first player I want to talk about is kind of a wild roster bubble candidate. I have been told to keep my eyes on Isaiah Simmons and if he is going to make this team. Look, they brought him back on a one-year deal for not a lot of money. And after watching the first episode of Hard Knocks, and as we already knew this, Shane Bowen wants to play Isaiah Simmons on early downs as a slot corner. And the major question I have is he a slot corner? I thought it was interesting when Brian Dable asked Shane Bowen, where do you see Isaiah Simmons in this defense? He says a slot corner the first couple of downs and that money roll on third downs. He pretty much said he's not a linebacker. He also said in that same meeting, in that Hard Knocks clip, that he needs his inside linebackers to be the smartest players on the field. Not saying Simmons is not that. Not saying Simmons is that. Just thought it was interesting. He didn't say he was a linebacker, and then he said he needed Simmons or the linebackers to be the smartest players on the field. You look at where Simmons is lined up throughout his career on the football field. It was 2022 when he was primarily used as that big slot corner for the Arizona Cardinals. He lined up there 409 times. I'm sure that's the type of role, that Bowen wants to see him in. Be a guy that could be a big nickel, big slot, that third safety on the field, and then that money roll in a dime defense where he's playing inside the box where a linebacker would line up. But I'm just not so sure if he's going to survive as a slot corner. Is he that guy? I'm not so sure. You look at what he did in 2023 for the New York Giants. He had 50 tackles, 2 tackles for loss, 3 pass breakups, 1 sack, and 1 interception. I don't think Wink Martindale deployed him correctly, and I'm not so sure that Shane Bowen is going to be able to deploy him correctly. I like the role of the money backer, but I don't know. Does Simmons have too much versatility? Is it that he's not great at any one thing and average at others that is actually hurting him? Because is he a linebacker? Is he a safety? Is he a slot corner? Is he a dime package linebacker? I don't think anyone knows at this point. You know, Bobby Okereke and Micah McFadden are going to make this team. Darius Muasau is probably going to make this team as well, as he was just drafted by the New York Giants. Carter Coughlin and Matthew Adams are special teams specialists. So it'll be interesting to see how that linebacker depth chart unfolds. And then if you just want to look at the other slot corners on this team, you got Nick McLeod, you got Andrew Phillips, the rookie, the third-round pick, and you got Darnay Holmes. So you already have 3 slot corners on this team. Nick McLeod's a better slot corner than Isaiah Simmons. Simmons probably better against the run. It'll be interesting to see how this unfolds for Isaiah Simmons. Let's talk about a receiver now, Isaiah Hodgins. 2 Isaiahs to start today's show. If you're watching this, your name's Isaiah, you're probably a roster bubble candidate as well. But I do think Hodgins is more so on the bubble than Simmons. I think Simmons is more likely to make the roster than Hodgins, and it's just a number game for number 18. You know Malik Neighbors is good. Darius Slayton's good. Hyatt is good. And Wan'Dale Robinson is good. That's 4 players that are going to make this team. The Giants kept 6 receivers last year. I assume they keep 6 again. Hodgins, Allen Robinson, Gunnar Olszewski, Isaiah McKenzie, Bryce Ford-Wheaton, and Miles Boykin, who people have said do not sleep on Miles Boykin as a special team specialist in making this roster. We just named 6 receivers competing for those final 2 spots. Will Hodgins be one of those players? Look, when he came over to the New York Giants, he was really good. They needed him, and he was very, very productive. He had 42 catches in 10 games, 459 yards, 11 yards per catch, 5 touchdowns, and he averaged 46 yards per game. Then his production, his workload, and his overall just really, I would say, opportunities got sliced in half. You saw some new receivers added to this team. They added Darren Waller. They took him and played him in the big slot. That's where Isaiah Hodgins had the most success. His receiving yards, cut in half. His receptions, cut in half. His touchdowns, cut in half. And his yards per game, cut into a third. He was great, though, in that playoff game against the Minnesota Vikings. Patrick Peterson could not guard him, still can't guard him, and I'm sure he's thinking about not being able to guard him, just like Patrick Seatman is. But I like Hodgins. It's just going to come down to how many receivers and what receivers are going to keep. he is firmly on the roster bubble, as is UDFA fan favorite Tommy Cutlets. Tommy DeVito is absolutely on the roster bubble. Any quarterback that is the QB3 for a football team is on the roster bubble because, look, are the Giants going to keep 3 QBs? Joe Schoen has already cut his roster down twice to 53 men as he's entering his 3rd season with the Giants. He kept 2 QBs in year 1. He kept 2 QBs in year 2. Will he keep 3 entering his 3rd year? That's something we got to find out. I'm sure the injury worries to Daniel Jones could come into that, as well as that injury guarantee. But it seems like Drew Lock is the guy that's going to be the backup quarterback for this team. He signed that 1-year, $5 million deal. I think Giants trust him a little more than DeVito, even though Tommy had a pretty solid stretch with the Giants in 6 starts. He was able to win 3 games. He was named the Offensive Player of the Week against the Green Bay Packers for what he did on Monday Night Football. Completed 64% of his passes, had 8 touchdowns and 3 interceptions. Look, if DeVito was probably a 5th-round pick, he'd be good as gold to make this roster. But he's not. He's a UDFA. And you know what? He's not a scholarship player for the Giants, so they're not going to treat him as one, more so like a walk-on, and you only get 53 roster spots. Do you want to keep 3 quarterbacks and then you only get to keep 5 receivers, or 3 quarterbacks and you only get to keep 8 or 9 offensive linemen? Well, if you add one to the quarterback room, you got to take away from somewhere else. I bet if you asked Joe Schoen and put him on a lie detector test and you said, what is your perfect situation for Tommy DeVito? He would say, we release him, nobody else picks him up, and we bring him back to the practice squad, and he's that emergency QB3 every single week. I'm not so sure, though, that there's not 64 quarterbacks in the NFL better than Tommy DeVito. There's just not. Are there 60? Maybe. But there are not 64 quarterbacks that are better. He knows this system. Maybe that's why he'll stick around. We'll see how that unfolds for Mr. Cutlets. We've got more roster bubble candidates. Not cut candidates, roster bubble candidates. Big difference. But first, go to chatsports.com/neighbors. That's chatsports.com/neighbors. And get yourself a Malik Neighbors jersey today. This link will be clickable in the comments and the description of today's show. Veteran corner Darnay Holmes also makes my short list of roster bubble candidates. Again, is he going to get the nod over Nick McLeod in the slot? Is he going to get the nod over Drew Phillips in the slot? There was some talk that Holmes was playing a little bit of outside corner throughout the spring and into the early summer practice for the New York Giants. He's just never been an outside corner. Since he was drafted out of UCLA, he has played in the slot. And he hasn't really done anything that would tell me he has to be on this team. I like what I've seen in some spots. He can play in this league, but he's not that great. And I would rather have Nick McLeod, Andrew Phillips, and maybe another young corner be the guy that's getting the nod over him. Do I want Drew Phillips playing the 3rd-round rookie, or do I want Darnay Holmes, the guy who's most likely closer to his way out than way in this league? That's why he's a roster bubble candidate for me. Last one we're going to talk about is Nacho, Rakeem Nunez-Roches. And this may come as a surprise to some people because we do have him listed as a starter on our defensive line depth chart. But you also got young guys like Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson. And you just signed Jordan Phillips. And you got Boogie Basham. And you got Ryder Anderson, the UDFA, Elijah Chapman. And if you watched Hard Knocks, Shane Bowen made it abundantly clear. I want 4 defensive linemen on the field at all times that can get after the quarterback. Rakeem Nunez-Roches is not a pass rusher. He is a run stopper. Maybe you look more to Davidson. Maybe you look more to Riley. He may even mention Ryder Anderson by name, saying could he be that guy? He mentioned Boogie Basham by name, saying could he be that guy? I think Nunez-Roches probably makes this roster, but what unfolds in training camp and into the preseason could determine if he actually is. If you had to pick one player between Isaiah Simmons, Isaiah Hodgins, Tommy DeVito, Darnay Holmes, and Rakeem Nunez-Roches, who do you think is most likely to be cut? Of these 5 players, I would probably say Darnay Holmes, and I would say the biggest shocking cut would be Simmons, as he's probably the most likely to make it. But, man, I'm really keeping my eyes on Isaiah Hodgins. I like the player. I like the mentality. Seems like a really good dude. He's bought into the New York Giants way. I'm hoping he makes this team. I think he's a good football player. but he somewhat got squeezed out of the rotation last year. You added more receivers this year. You want to keep a punt returner. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. Make sure you are following me on social media. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram @MarshallGreen_. Give me a follow, and let's go Big Blue.